Hey everybody, welcome back to our channel. It's a beautiful day in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's 77 degrees right now and sunny, and I thought this is a perfect day to go explore another cemetery. Today I'm in the Pinewood Cemetery in Charlotte. Earlier this month, we took tours of Settlers Cemetery, which contains the remains of many of Charlotte, North Carolina's founding settlers, and the Elmwood Cemetery, which is the final resting place for many of Charlotte's New South pioneers. Today we are going to explore Pinewood Cemetery, located right beside the Elmwood Cemetery, where many of Charlotte's prominent Black citizens are interred. There are hundreds of graves in this cemetery, and many of them are unmarked. This cemetery is owned by the City of Charlotte and was originally established in 1853 as a burial ground for African Americans. There is also a section of Pinewood that was originally known as Potter's Field, in which people were buried who were too poor to purchase a plot. In an 1893 report from the Good Samaritan Hospital, some of their patients that died that year were buried in Pinewood in the hospital lot at the expense of the hospital. While today the Elmwood and Pinewood cemeteries are operated as and appear to be one, they were originally separated by a fence and had two distinct entrances. Historically, Charlotte's white citizens were buried in the Elmwood Cemetery, and the Black citizens were buried here in Pinewood. Fred Alexander, Charlotte's first Black City Council member, led a movement in the late 1960s to desegregate the two cemeteries. For most of 1968, he pushed the City Council's white majority to remove the fence. Finally, in 1969, Mayor Stan R. Brookshire broke the stalemate and the fence was removed the following day by the Mecklenburg Jaycees, a service organization for Black youth. After more than a century of segregation, Charlotte's second municipal cemetery finally became a single burial ground. Elmwood and Pinewood combined total more than 75 acres of land that is open to the public daily. Michael and I come here often. He goes for a run while I walk the dog. There are also many community events that take place on these grounds. Today, I thought it would be fun to look for the graves of some prominent people from Charlotte who are buried here in Pinewood. I think that Pinewood Cemetery deserves to be its own standalone video because of its historical significance. The first grave we're going to stop at is the grave of Thad Lincoln Tate. Thad Lincoln Tate was born in 1865 and became one of Charlotte's earliest and most prominent African American businessmen. He first came to Charlotte as a barber and opened his own barber shop in 1882, a business that he would run for 61 years. In addition, Tate was prominent in the banking industry in Charlotte. He served as the director of the Mechanics Perpetual Building and Loan Company and was a founder of the Mecklenburg Investment Company. Mr. Tate's civic contributions to Charlotte were many. He was one of the founders of the Grace AME Zion Church and helped to found the Brevard Street Library, which later became part of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library System. He was also a founder of a branch of the YMCA for Black members. Not too far here from Mr. Tate is the grave of Caesar Robert Blake. Caesar Blake was born in 1886 in Winnsboro, South Carolina. He worked as a clerk with the Norfolk and Southern Railway systems and then as a real estate broker in Charlotte, North Carolina. Mr. Blake was active in fraternal societies, and in 1919, at the age of 33, he became the imperial potentate of the ancient Egyptian Arabic Order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine affiliated with Prince Hall. He served in that role until his death in 1931. During his tenure, he advocated for local Prince Hall shrine lodges that were embroiled in a racially charged legislative dispute before the U.S. Supreme Court in 1912 and 1929. In 1904, leaders from the predominantly white Knights of Pythias and the Shriners launched a legal campaign against parallel African American orders, accusing the groups of fraud and copyright violations. This manifested itself in dozens of legal suits against African American orders over 29 states over a 30-year period. This particular campaign was thought to be at least partially motivated by racism, and they supported their beliefs with official publications that included derogatory language about African Americans. Mr. Blake, along with many other fraternal leaders and lawyers, helped to organize a legal campaign for the Prince Hall Shrine and secured funding for the legal costs. In 1929, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Prince Hall Shrine, and Mr. Blake issued a proclamation after the victory stating, "This is not only a distinct victory for our order, but also for our race." Mr. Blake died 2 years later in 1931 after a brief and sudden illness at the age of 45. Not too far from Mr. Tate and Mr. Blake is the grave of Dr. John Taylor Williams. Dr. John Williams was a prominent figure in the history of African Americans in Charlotte. He was one of the first 3 black doctors to be licensed to practice in North Carolina, and he also served as an educator and a businessman. Dr. Williams was born in 1859, the son of a free black man named Peter Williams, who operated a successful lumber business in Cumberland County. His mother, Anne McKay Williams, began teaching him how to read. When the family moved to Garnett County in 1866, they hired a white widow to teach him and his siblings how to read in exchange for doing work on her farm. In 1876, Williams entered the State Normal School, which is today known as Fayetteville State University. He graduated in 1880 and taught at a number of different schools before coming to Charlotte in 1882. He was among the faculty members who founded the first public school for black children, known as the Myers Street School, and he taught there for 3 years. In 1883, Dr. Williams entered Shaw University Leonard's Medical School in Raleigh, North Carolina. He returned to Charlotte in 1886 and established a large surgical practice here and also served as president of the Queen City Drug Company. Besides medicine, John was successful in business and real estate investments. From 1888 until 1892, he served as a city alderman. President William McKinley appointed him to the position of consul to Sierra Leone in 1898. Williams served in this capacity until 1907. Dr. Williams was a founding member of the Grace AME Zion Church on South Brevard Street near his home, and he was a trustee of the AME Zion Publishing Company. He died on June 8, 1924, shortly after suffering from a stroke during the morning services at church. Next up, we're going to visit the grave of Bishop Thomas Henry Lomax. Thomas Lomax was born sometime in the 1830s in Cumberland, North Carolina. His grandfather, William Lomax, had moved to America from Africa with the French General Marquis de Lafayette, and he had fought in the American Revolution under General George Washington and General Lafayette. Bishop Lomax is barely known by his name today, but he was once a notable figure in Charlotte, North Carolina. During his lifetime, he achieved several titles in the Methodist Church, such as ordained deacon, a licensed preacher, an elder selected to the bishopric, and as a missionary in Canada. He is credited with ordaining many elders and deacons, organizing and building several churches in North and South Carolina, and presiding over several conference districts in the United States and Canada. He was instrumental in educating others and is known as a founding member of the committee which selected Livingstone College, an institution that is now located in Salisbury, North Carolina. Bishop Lomax donated money for the institution in its beginning stages and also attended the college to graduate with a doctorate of divinity. Bishop Lomax died on March 31, 1908, in Charlotte at the age of 76. Next, we are going to look at this absolutely beautiful sculpture dedicated to a woman named Amelia Duncan. Unfortunately, there seems to be no information, at least that I could find, online about the young woman buried in this plot. This beautifully carved statue stands as a silent sentinel over the memory of Amelia Duncan, who was born in 1892 and left the world in 1932. There isn't a lot of information online about Mr. R. R. Morris either. He was born in 1835 and is remembered for being the first superintendent of Sunday School Union and the editor of Sunday School Literature at the AME Zion Connection. This next fantastic mausoleum that we are going to check out was designed by Mr. William W. Smith. Mr. Smith was born in Mecklenburg County in 1862 and resided here all of his life. He apprenticed under William H. Hauser, but by the turn of the 20th century, he had emerged as an active brickmason, contractor, and designer. He is regarded as a pioneer in the development of black businesses in the city and is recognized as Charlotte's first black architect. Mr. Smith constructed the Grace AME Zion Church, and he and his wife were founding members of the congregation. Counted among its members were many of the wealthiest and most respected members of Charlotte's Black Brooklyn neighborhood. Mr. Smith also did the masonry work for North Carolina's first public library founded for black citizens. He served as a brickmason for buildings constructed on Livingston College and also provided plans for a massive dormitory at Livingstone. He was also the designer of the 3-story AME Zion publishing house. Mr. Smith also designed commercial structures. He built the Afro-American Insurance Company buildings in Charlotte and Rock Hill sometime around 1909, which displays his characteristic polychrome brickwork. His last known design was the Mecklenburg Investment Company on Brevard Street in Charlotte. This 3-story brick building was cooperatively funded by a group of black professionals and housed lodged rooms on the 3rd floor, offices on the 2nd, and storefronts on the 1st floor. Mr. Smith's work was skillfully executed, elaborate, and vivid, featuring coralling and often polychromy, highlighting his background of brick masonry. He especially liked mixing red and yellow brick and plain and textured brick to produce lively ornamental effects to enrich his typically straightforward rectilinear buildings. Mr. Smith died in 1937 at 75 years of age and was buried in the family mausoleum that he had helped design, along with his father, his first wife, and his sister. This brick mausoleum, which he built, takes the shape of a classical temple and presents a virtuosic display of his brickwork techniques. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Samuel Lafayette Alexander Taylor was born in the late 1840s or the early 1850s as a slave in South Carolina. For most of his childhood, he was enslaved in Union County and worked as a shoemaker. During the American Civil War, the Confederate contract forced Taylor to continue working on shoes, primarily making them out of either cloth or wood due to the shortage of leather. After the war, Taylor studied at several Quaker schools, and he opened up a barber shop on East Trade Street in Charlotte. During this time, he also served as a fireman and as a secretary of the Neptune Volunteer Fire Company, which was made up of former slaves and freed black men. He eventually served in numerous state and national fire service organizations and became the financial secretary of the North Carolina Colored Volunteer Firemen's Association in 1891, a position he would hold for 18 years before assuming presidency in the late 1920s. He gained enough prominence in Charlotte that for 2 years, between 1885 and 1887, he served as an alderman representing the 3rd Ward of the city. He also served as a ballroom dancer, teaching ballroom dancing to white women in Charlotte. Mr. Taylor organized an all-black infantry unit within the North Carolina National Guard in 1887. Upon the outbreak of the Spanish-American War, He was promoted to lieutenant colonel of the regiment and made second in command. Not much is known about Mr. George Miller, who is resting in peace here. This marker is a shaped block of granite on a single granite base, and it is one of the few marked graves of an enslaved person that survives in this cemetery today. Most slaves that were buried here either received wooden stakes that have long since disintegrated, or they were buried in plots that were never even marked at all. Mr. Miller's marker reads, died July 27, 1925, age about 75 years. A slave, and all of his life a loyal and faithful servant of R.M. Miller, Sr. This monument is erected to his memory by R.M. Miller, Jr. This has become known as the Jones Mausoleum. This mausoleum was also designed by Mr. W. W. Smith for the Jones family, although there is almost no information about this family online. You have probably heard of Romare Bearden, who was a very famous American artist, author, and songwriter. Romare Bearden was born in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1911, and we are very proud to claim him as a local celebrity. Both of his grandparents were property owners, and both of his parents were college graduates. However, due to the repressive culture in the South where Jim Crow laws were in full force, the family relocated to Harlem in 1914, but they made frequent trips back to Charlotte to visit the grandparents. The contrasting lifestyle of the traditional rural family setting in Charlotte with the fast-paced urban life in New York City was a point of fascination to Bearden. He found value and inspiration in both lifestyles, and both are prevalent themes in many of his works. This is the final resting place of Romare Bearden's grandparents who lived in Charlotte, Henry and Rosa Kennedy. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it for you. It's a gorgeous day, and I'm going to enjoy a nice long walk in this cemetery by myself and just enjoy these gorgeous, gorgeous views, beautiful skyline, beautiful trees, beautiful tombstones, and all these people resting in peace. See you guys another day in another adventure. Thank you for watching.